Look at Ecclesiastes, and we looked at chapter 3 and chapter 4. There were some interesting things that we found, and one of the things that we kind of focused on 2 weeks ago, and it led into last week and it leads into this week, is chapter 3, verse 11. And if you look at chapter 3, verse 11, it says this: He, being God, has made everything beautiful in time. God has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. And we said that, hey, when we look at this, this is what sets us apart from the rest of creation. That God has given us this sense of eternity, this sense of eternal life, that there's a greater meaning to things in life, those type of ideas. We're set apart, we're created to be like Him. He is eternal, and so we have that in us as well. And as we have that internal thoughts and eternal things into us, we ask the question, so well, how do we respond to this? How do we respond to the fact that we're created as eternal beings? And we listed some things, okay? We said that the first thing as an eternal being, that there's something that draws us to God. I just got done reading a book this week, and some of the books I read are books that are, theological books, type of books like that, but sometimes I just read books for fun. And I never thought I would say that in my life. I can't believe I just said that, okay? It just hit me that way. But I was reading a book called Shoeless Joe Jackson. Now, some of you don't have any idea about baseball, but some of you may remember watching a movie a long time ago called Field of Dreams. And that's the book, the Field of Dreams. And it's about baseball. But in the book and in the movie, this is a crazy guy, crazy farmer, corn farmer, gets rid of takes part of his acreage that raised corn on, and builds a baseball field in the middle of nowhere. And he does it because he hears a voice. Now, you go through the whole book and you go through the whole thing and go through it. And one of the things that happens is that toward the end of the movie, well, all through the movie, the farmer is about to lose his farm because he can't make the payments on the farm, and because he owes too much money. But at the end of the movie, or not in the movie, end of the book, one of the other characters talked to us and said, well, what you need to do is you need to open this up and let anybody come that will come. And they'll be drawn to it. There'll be something that draws them here. He says, then you can charge $20 a person, and you can pay your mortgage. You can pay your payments. And so he decided to do that. And of course, it's a book that was written with a good ending. All these people started coming. Families would come. A husband would drive there and get there, and they would go sit on the bleachers of this baseball field, and maybe the husband and kids could look out on the baseball field and see a team playing, and imagine the team playing, and the wife's like, what are we doing here? Or other circumstances where the wife's just like, isn't this great? And the husband's just like going, I got to read something because I don't know what we're doing here in the hot sun in the middle of Iowa, that type of thing. But here's the point. I thought about that this week, and I thought about this. And you see, it's the eternal. It's that eternal part inside of us that draws us to God, that says there's something bigger than myself. There's something bigger than this world. There's something bigger out there. And people are searching for that all over. And when we're searching for that, and we realize that, the first thing comes back is putting our faith or putting our trust into God. Saying, you created me this way, I'm going to trust you then with the eternal. And then being prepared for the eternal. Okay? By being prepared by getting to know God, and living a life with God. Then we said the third thing is invest in godly adventures. What's going to last? Okay? We know the things of this world won't last, but the things of God will last throughout all eternity. So what kind of godly adventures are you investing with? And then we said we need to share that message with other people as well, because they are searching, they are looking, they're drawn, and they don't understand why, they don't know why, but they're drawn to God, and we can be prepared and ready to share that message with them. But we said, hey, here's the problem. We think about that, we get to that, and sometimes maybe it's a song, maybe it's a sermon, maybe we do a retreat weekend, maybe we've had a great personal time with God all week long, and we get fired up. We get excited. We say, okay, we're going to go change the world. We're going to go do this. We're going to do that. And then the frustrations of life start coming in, okay? Some of you that starts Sunday night because you're thinking about going to work on Monday. Some of you that starts Monday morning when you get to work. Some of you, it's I do good till about Wednesday, then I can't handle it anymore after that, okay? But there's different frustrations, and we said those frustrations frustrate our heart, frustrate that sense of eternity, that sense of eternal worth and eternal purpose in our lives. And so as we looked at that, we said, hey, I told you this. I said, here's one solution. You just start banging your head on the wall or banging your head on the solid surface. And if you read the small print of that, it'll say, keep banging until you're unconscious. And that's the only way to get rid of the frustrations. But that's not the only way. There are other ways to get frustrations in the heart. And so in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, the writer addresses some of those frustrations. And we went through 3 of these last week. We said the first thing was that the oppressed. And some of you are like, yeah, I understand that. I'm oppressed. Or you see oppression around you all the time. And as we looked at that and we said, well, how do we deal with that? Well, the thing that you combat oppression is that you assist the oppressed. Okay? Because it's our tendency when we're oppressed or we see oppression to sometimes when we're oppressed, we will lash out toward other people and take our oppression out on them. But what we need to do is see how can we help those that are oppressed around us? What can we do? Okay? And then we said the second thing about a frustration in our heart was in verse 4 is jealousy. Okay? And we said jealousy's got a couple of problems. It harms you. It harms your relationships. And it harms others. And then jealousy does one other thing that we talked about, and it's the fact that when we do things out of jealousy, even if we win, it's more of an empty victory because deep down we know we didn't do it for the right reasons or we didn't win for the right reasons. And so we have this empty victory within us. And so our hearts are frustrated. That sense of eternity within us is frustrated. And then we said here's how we attack jealousy. We said, hey, first of all, whatever you do, work at it for God's glory. Okay? A couple verses, 1 Corinthians 10, another verse in Colossians we looked at. And then learn to be content with all things. Bear fruit. In other words, do good things, do good work, share the gospel with other people, love other people, have empathy with other people, okay? And then care for others. And if you do those things, what that does is start to putting other people's needs as importance. And when you start putting other people's needs ahead of your own, then jealousy starts to go away. And instead of being jealous of somebody, you start celebrating when they have a win. You start being happy for them. You start supporting them more. You start doing what you can to care for them, to empathize with them, those type of things. And then we said the last one that we looked at last week was idleness. And as I told you last week, a lot of commentaries and all said they call this laziness. But I like this word idleness because it kind of brings a different thought. It's just like we sit and do nothing. It's not necessarily that you're lazy. You're just doing nothing. You're just idle. Whereas you ought to be doing things. And you need to maybe just to go to work. And I mentioned to you that sometimes when I talk to people and they say, well, how can I know God's will? And I'm struggling to know God's will and everything else. The question I want to ask, and sometimes I do ask it, is, well, how much time are you spending with God? Praying, reading your Bible, and things like that. Because if we don't do that, we're idle in our relationship with God. If I didn't talk with Nancy all week long, do you think Nancy would be happy with me? No. Well, I don't think so. Would you be happy with me if I didn't talk to you all week long? Do not say yes, okay? No, she wouldn't be happy with me, okay? She wants me to talk to her. God wants us to be in a relationship with Him, to talk to Him, to learn about Him, to follow Him. So we need to get to work in that. So that brings us to where we are this week, okay? So, frustrations of the heart. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 6, and I wrote this as dissatisfaction. okay? We're just not satisfied with life and how it's going. We're not satisfied with our job. We're not satisfied with our relationships. We're not satisfied with how much money we earn or have or saved. We're not satisfied with, how much weight we've been losing on our diet, or we're not satisfied with how much weight we've gained, different things. Everything. We can look at it and we say, we're not satisfied with this. We're not satisfied with that. So it's an idea of dissatisfaction. Now look how he words it here. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 6 says this: better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Tranquility. Some English translations will say better to live with being content. Okay? Better to live within your means, different things like that. I looked up tranquility in the dictionary. I know what tranquility is, but I wanted to see specifically what a dictionary says. And it says this: it's a state of freedom from storm or disturbance. And I thought, wow, better one handful, in other words, better to have just enough than not to have storms in your life. Okay? Second definition was evenness of emotions or temper. Better to have just enough than to be angry all the time or to be dissatisfied all the time. To have those emotions or have that temper. Third definition is freedom from disquieting or oppressive thoughts or emotions. Better to have just enough than to deal with all kinds of thoughts in your head, negative thoughts, different things like that. That's what I want in life. That's what I think most of us want in life. So, tranquility is simply peace, contentment in life. Okay? Better to have a handful and to have those things. And yesterday I was having a conversation with someone, and we were talking a little bit about our fathers. Actually, I had this conversation twice this week. Different ways the conversation went, but different conversations about our fathers and how our fathers did things and how our fathers kind of simplified things. And I was telling that my dad, I can remember like when I was in high school that you went into the garage and he had painted the floors, and there was a box where the cars would park, and there was a rug over here on the side. That's where you put your shoes down. There was a space for everything, and everything kind of had it. It's kind of the idea of everything has a space, and every space has a thing, okay? So you always put things back where it goes. You always do this, you always do that. And how great a thing that was, and how organized it was. And earlier in this week, the person I was talking to, the friend I was talking to, talked about his dad did that too, that there was he would draw a box on the ground, and that's where the lawnmower set, okay? That his father was in industry and managed factories and things like that, and that you go into a factory and you could see his influence there, because how things were painted and how things were done and things were organized, and everything was always supposed to be where it was supposed to be. And we talked about that in a little bit. And there's part of that is that these type of people, what they will do if they don't have anything that they can use, or if they haven't used it in a while, they will get rid of it. They will simplify their lives in that type of way. Okay? They'll get rid of it. Just we don't need this. Let's give it away to somebody that needs it. Let's donate it. Let's just throw it away. Whatever else it needs to do. And that's a characteristic about trying to simplify that. And I got to thinking about that. And there's what I was talking about yesterday. There's a spiritual discipline. It's called discipline of simplicity. And a discipline of simplicity is not that you live a simple life on the outside, but it means that inwardly you're more simplified in your life, and then that usually translates outside as well too. And there's a pastor and his wife that I really admire, and I've can't say I know him very well, but he's been here in Taiwan a couple different times for a couple of stints for about a year each time, and I got to spend some time with him both times. And they have lived their whole lives. They're probably almost 80 years old right now. And they have lived their whole lives with that idea of simplifying their lives, of just having enough to what they need, okay? About living their life simple, and they're such a peaceful, happy couple. And it just always amazes me. It always amazed me when he was faced with things, and you know, because I was around when he was faced with a few things, and he was at peace. He was at ease because he strived in his life was not about getting more, but his life was about just having what he needed. And that's what this verse is saying. Don't be dissatisfied with what you have and thinking you've got to push on for more and more. Okay? People aren't usually satisfied with life. Usually they want more and more. Paul wrote to Timothy, and he said this. He said in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Okay? He said you got a good relationship with God, you're content with life, you are going to gain so much more than anybody else. Then he kind of gives us a little bit of insight to what he was thinking. For we were brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. And you know other verses. God says not to worry because what? He'll provide for us. You know, look at the birds of the air and the lily of the valley. Yeah, they don't worry. And we are God's special creation. So we can be content in what God provides for us. Now, it's hard. It's hard for some of us as we look at our bank accounts, as we look at our job situations, as we look at other things, our friendships, our relationships, people around us, where we've been in life, where we're going in life. It's hard sometimes to be content. But go to God and talk about it and ask God to help you to be content in where you are and what you do. Jesus said this. He said, look out, or watch out. Be on guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Okay? Man's life does not resist in his possessions. That shouldn't be our place of security. Okay? Your place of security shouldn't be your relationships or your job status or how much money you have. It shouldn't be, you know, how good looking you are or how fit you are or anything else. Our security should come from God. Look what I said. Let God be your security. Okay? That's how we become content in the situations we're in. Paul says he learned to be content when he was wealthy or when he was poor, if he was free or if he was in prison. And we could be content in those situations too by letting God be what we base our security in. Look at these verses. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5 says this, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Because God has said what? I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. That is our security in life. That's where we can take a deep breath in the midst of trouble, in the midst of everything else, and relax and say, God, I know you got this. I know you can handle this. And I'm going to trust in you. I'm going to follow you. And I'm not going to be frustrated by it. I'm going to rely on you. So we have frustrations of the heart about being content in where we are. And then this next one kind of follows in on it. But we're going to skip down a few verses. And it's in Ecclesiastes 13 through 16, chapter 4. And I said frustrations of the heart is advancement. Now what I mean by this, by advancement, is that we're seeking after, you know, maybe the top position, maybe a leadership position. They use the idea of being a king here in this passage. Okay? Maybe you want to be the boss. Maybe you want to be everything else. And there's nothing wrong with all these things. But is The question is your life focused on that? Is your life dependent on that? Okay? Because that's where Solomon, or whoever wrote this, Ecclesiastes, we're not exactly sure who wrote Ecclesiastes. Many evidence point towards Solomon, but there's some things that says he didn't. But the idea is that whoever wrote this is looking at all these things and saying the pursuit of these things is meaningless in the end. The pursuit of these things did not help us to have the sense of purpose in our life, because the pursuit of these things don't add to the sense of the eternal that we have installed into us. And he's not saying that they're wrong, but what he's saying is we need to learn how to handle these things. So look at verse 13. It says, better a poor wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to take a warning. And he said, hey, you get to be a king. You can't take a warning. You can't, you're not taking any advice from anybody else. You think you're on top. You think everybody else has to listen to you. All these things. That's what happens with power. And power will frustrate us sometimes because we get to the top and we realize that people don't follow us. Okay? As a parent, I realize now that my kids are not going to do everything I tell them to do the first time I tell them to do it. I'm powerful. I'm their dad. But it still doesn't work very well. And that can be frustrating if I let it be frustrating. The rest of those verses says the youth have come from prison within his kingdom. Or the youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born poverty within his kingdom. I saw that those who lived and walked under the sun and followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them. Now listen to this. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, chasing after wind. If you're chasing power, if you're chasing leadership, to make people around you happy, to make people around you follow you, it's not going to happen. It'll happen to some degree. But if that is your focus, you're going to be frustrated in the end. And it brings frustration to our heart and frustration to our tendency. Look at this next thing. Frustrations of the heart. And this is what I told you last week I think is the most important one, because I think this one is kind of the foundation for the others. Okay? And I said going it alone. And if you maybe look in your Bible and see a heading, or maybe if you look in a commentary, you'll see that a lot of people talk about loneliness in this section. There's a verse that we're going to read today, actually a verse that someone put out on our group line message yesterday, that Nancy and I, in our original Red and Wings, the reference was inscribed on the inside of it. And it's about 2 are better than 1, but a cord of 3 cannot easily be broken. And so we're going to talk about that here in a minute in this. But the frustrations of the heart, going it alone. And when we look at this verse, it says, I saw something meaningless under the sun. So here again, he's looking at, he's seeing something else. And he's like, this too is meaninless. It says there was a man all alone. He had neither a son or a brother. Okay? There was no end to his toil. So he spent his life working to get ahead, working maybe for a better salary, maybe to earn more money, maybe to buy more land, to have bigger crops, to be the best player, whatever else it was involved. But there was no end to his toil. He worked sun up to sundown, 7 days a week. That was his focus. Okay, but because of that, he missed out on other things. Okay. It says, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. So no matter how hard he worked, no matter how much he gained, he wasn't content. For whom am I toiling? He starts asking himself. Why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? Where does his enjoyment? He's got lots of wealth. Where does enjoyment come from? Why is he depriving himself? It's with relationships. Strong friendships, family relationships, a relationship with God. This too is meaningless, a miserable business. He said, hey, I've wasted my life on things that are not eternal. And it hasn't brought me the satisfaction I've wanted. It hasn't brought me the things that I've wanted in life because I've searched after the wrong thing. So when we talk about frustrations with God, going alone, we deal with that by building relationships based in God. Okay? Two are better than one, for they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. We need friendships here. We need relationships here. This is why we meet as a church. Okay? Now, I've been through lots of life. I've talked with lots of different people, and I've had people say, well, I don't need to go to church. I have a relationship with God. Yeah, you need to go to church because you need relationships with the other believers who can encourage you, who can support you, who can pray for you, who can be there to help. All the things that you need. Okay? And I've mentioned this to you many times before, and you've experienced this before, that one of the things I love about being a Christian and one of the things I love about being part of God's family is I have brothers and sisters all over this world. And I have met people that I have never even met before, and maybe only spent a couple days from them, but I felt a connection with them that I've never felt with other people, and that connection is because of our relationship to God. And that's where that next verse is going. Look at this. Also, if two lie down together, who will keep warm? But how can one keep warm alone? You can't do it by yourself. You need help to do it. Though a man may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. And a cord of three is not quickly broken. And we can apply this in other ways. We can say 3 friends are better than 2 friends, which is often the case. But when you have a friendship, a relationship, and God is that third strand, I don't know about you, that seems like a pretty powerful cord. One that will not be broken and one that cannot be broken. It may be that one of the strands get frayed a little bit, maybe even break, but God's still there going to hold it together if everyone's focused on Him in that relationship. And he said, hey, this is how you combat that sense of loneliness. This is how you combat this idea of going it alone. You search for those relationships. Look what I wrote here. I said there's a hole in the human heart that can only be filled with the eternal because we're eternal beings. These frustrations that we've listed, God has said, hey, these things, like I said before, they're not bad. We need to work. We need to earn. We need to save for the future. We need to develop friendships around us. We need, it's good to want to rise to the top and to be the leader and everything else. But he said, if you're basing your sense of worth on those things, you're going to be frustrated. Base your sense of worth in God. He is the eternal. He is what makes all the difference. One thing about it is, we look at the Bible written by over 40 different authors over, approximately 1,500, 2,000 years. And we look at it, and it comes back and always points to relationships. Why did God create? You go back to Genesis, God created because He wanted a relationship with you and I. Why did God create Eve? Because He saw that Adam needed a partner. That's a relationship. If you go through the whole Bible, you see it's all about relationships. Why did Jesus come? It's about relationship, our relationship with God. It's all there. Solomon, as he looked at all this, he said, hey, we're created in the image of God, or Solomon, I said, but the writer of Ecclesiastes. We're created in the image of God. God is eternal. He's given us the eternal heart. And so there's things in this world, pleasure, power, prosperity, can't satisfy what's missing here. Only can be filled with the things that are eternal, because it's an eternal part of our heart that's been created within us. A person, you, I, was not created to be temporal, but was created for eternity. Was created for a relationship with God. That's how we can deal with these things. That's how we can deal with these frustrations. They start popping up, and you start thinking about your relationship with God, and you start reaching out to God and praying to God and saying, God, I want to trust you. God, I want to feel my completeness in you, if you want to think of it that way. Help me to set these frustrations aside. Help me to focus on you. And there's some of you that may need to take that last couple verses we read and say this, say, God, I need a friend here to help me. I was in Taiwan for a couple of years and a long time ago, and I had been here for 2.5 years. I went to work at a church up in Tin Mu, and after I was there a couple of months, I was like, I don't have a close friendship that I need here in Taiwan. And I started praying, God, bring me another man, another friend, a man friend that I could have a close relationship with. And shortly after that, I went to Cambodia for a mission trip. Actually, not a mission trip. I went for what we called a pre-trip. I went to go see what we could do in Cambodia. And I didn't want to go by myself, so I talked with some other people in the church and just asked if anybody wanted to go. And we had a missions committee and different things like that. And there was a couple in the church, and I had known them a little bit, but just not too much. And there was a couple in church, and they actually said, hey, we'd like to go with you if we can. And I was like, great, come on. Well, at one point during that week we were there, we were riding down a road, and the man and I were talking, and actually we were in a van, and he and I were sitting on seats, and his wife was actually on the seat right behind us, and we're talking, and his wife's just like, are you two brothers? And I'm kind of like, what? And we're like, what? And she's like, I can't believe how you guys think exactly the same about things. Now, we didn't think exactly the same about things, but we were very similar. You see, I needed that type of friendship, and God brought that friendship to me. And I'm so thankful for that friendship. That person doesn't live in Taiwan anymore. I still contact him every once in a while, not as much as I should, but whenever we do contact each other, or he calls me, or whatever, and I'm just happy because of that friendship. You may need that. You may need to start praying, God, bring me a special friend. Somebody that our relationship is based in you. Somebody that we can encourage each other, we can share our frustrations with, we can hold each other accountable, we can do those type of things. And then seek God out and say, God, you're the most important thread of this relationship. Okay? Whole and human heart can only be filled with eternal because we are eternal beings. Stop searching for things that are meaningless. Start searching for things that have eternal meaning. Let's go to God in prayer. Father, I thank you for Ecclesiastes, for the writings here, Father, for